si bon de partir n'importe où, bras dessus, bras dessous.
It's the music.
En chantant des
Hi,
chansons.
good evening, everybody. Welcome to KQED Live here in the Commons. I'm the Executive Director of KQED Live, Ryan Davis. And KQED Live is the events programming side of your favorite public media station. We're dedicated to bringing our journalism to life on stage, amplifying our Bay Area local culture, and deepening civic participation. We present screenings and talks and performances and food tastings and interactive game shows and so much more. You can learn all about that at kqed.org/live. Excuse me. And we want to thank the season sponsors that make KQED Live possible. Asian Art Museum, Berkeley Repertory Theater, Comcast Business, and Oakland International Airport. That's not true. It's the San Francisco Symphony. We've got a new season, and they just joined us. Boy, oh boy. Well, we really appreciate them. And we are so grateful for all of their commitment to helping support our mission for civic and cultural engagement here in the Bay Area. And we have one extremely generous giveaway tonight. Berkeley Rep is giving one randomly selected audience member tonight a FlexPass subscription to their 2022-2023 season. Yes. And so this package includes 4 tickets good for all seating sections in any of their season productions except excluding special events. Now, we are going to announce that lucky attendee at the end of the night. So stay here.
Stay tuned.
I'll come right out after and let you know who that lucky randomly selected winner is. But first, I want to turn it over to our wonderful partners at Litquake. And with me tonight is Jane Gunnall. She is the co-founder and artistic director of Litquake.
Thank you. Well, welcome to Litquake. This is our 23rd year, and we are a literary festival that will run through October 22nd. We always culminate on October 22nd with the Lit Crawl in the Mission District, which is a wild night of free literature mayhem, and it's fabulous. You must come. This year we have more than 100 events during 2 weeks and about 350 authors, so there's something for every taste. And we are incredibly and especially proud tonight to be partnering with KQED. It feels like we've hit the big time, you know. And they have such an amazing history of championing the arts in the Bay Area. Michael Krasny and Forum especially always booking authors that are going to appear. In fact, one of them is appearing tonight. So you should have programs circulated through the audience. Please take a look at them and see what else is coming up that might tickle your fancy. You can also support Margaret by buying her book tonight, which is being sold in the audience, in the lobby by Marcus Books. Thank you very much, Marcus. And we'd like to, because we are also a nonprofit, we'd like to thank our big 4 donors, which is Craig Newmark Philanthropies. Craig is amazing, a book nerd of all time. Grants for the Arts, the Minor Anderson Foundation, and the Brabson Library. So thank you for coming, and I will toss it back to Ryan.
Okay, so tonight you're in for such a treat. Litquake is kicking off their festival here with us by bringing you author Margaret Wilkerson Sexton, who joins Mina Kim, our host of KQED Forum, for a conversation about her new book, On the Rooftop. Set in the 1950s era of San Francisco's Fillmore neighborhood, the book testifies to the musical and cultural renaissance of its Black community and to the displacement it would face under the neighborhood's redevelopment. Now, to help us transport to that time, to its music, to its history, before tonight's conversation, we're graced this evening by one of San Francisco's most esteemed jazz singers and music historians. She's played everywhere from SF Jazz to the Monterey Jazz Festival to Lincoln Center in New York. Please put your hands together for Dr. Kim Nalley and her pianist Tammy Hall. 'Cause, 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 '
on your heart and soul today?
What it's like when it feels like everything is going wrong. Somehow, you know you got to carry on. You ask your mama to help you, but she busy working. You asked your grandma, she said, we've been through worse. And it's up to you to get over. So tell me, how did I get over? Tell me, how did I get over? You know my soul looks back and wonders how I made it over. I said, how'd I make it over? How I got over. I had a hard time coming over. How I got over. All these years, my soul looks back and wonders how I made it over. But I'm gonna tell you, as soon as I could see Jesus, the man who died for me, that man, he bled and suffered, and he hung on the cross for you and me. And I'm gonna thank God for how he taught me. I'm gonna thank God for how he bought me. I'm gonna thank my Lord 'cause he blessed me. I'm gonna thank him 'cause he never left me. And I'm gonna sing hallelujah. And I'm gonna shout, my troubles are over. 'Cause I wanna thank him for being so good to me. Tell me how'd you get over? How I got over. Tell me how did you get over? How I got over. You know our souls look back and wonder how we made it over. I said how we got over. We had to cry in the midnight hour, coming on over there. Sometimes my soul looks back and wonders how I made it over. Now listen, folks, one day I'm gonna wear a real diadem in that new Jerusalem. I'm gonna walk the streets of old in the whole land of the soul. I'm marching up the north, south, east, and west, going to the land that that we love best. And I'm gonna sing in the heavenly choir. And I'm gonna sing and I'm never gonna get tired. And I'm gonna sing hallelujah. And I'm gonna shout all my trouble over. As I wanna thank him for being so good to me. Tell me how I got over.
How I got over.
How did we make it over?
How did we make it over?
You know my soul looks back and it wonders. How did my folks, how did we make it over? That, of course, is a song written by one of the world's greatest gospel singers of all time, Clara Ward, and was also done by Mahalia Jackson and the High Priestess of Soul, and also the Queen herself, Miss Aretha Franklin. Do you know what it means to miss New Orleans and miss it with all of your heart? It hasn't been long, but the feeling's getting stronger the longer we stay apart. Miss the moss-covered vines, them tall sugar pines, where mockingbirds used to sing. And I long to see that lazy Mississippi hurrying along into spring. Now the beignets at the Cafe du Monde, Kermit Ruffin's barbecue smell, it fills the air. I'm dreaming of oleanders in June, and I'm wishing that I was there. Do you know what it means to miss New Orleans when that's where you left your heart? And there's something more. I miss all the folks that used to live there more than New Orleans.
poor boys at the Acme Oyster House. A preservation jazz band tune fills the air. I dream of magnolias in bloom, and I'm wishing that I was there. Do you know what it means to miss New Orleans, where that's where you left your heart? And there's one thing more, I miss all the folks that used to live there more than I miss New Orleans. This next tune is Ella Fitzgerald's biggest hit, and it's the one that kind of propelled her from being this chick singer with the chick web band to being a superstar. And it's featured very prominently inside of Margaret's book, and I do love the song, so I wanted to get a chance to do it for you. Boo, boo, Jiddly boo boo biddly boo boo widdy boo. Zoodle doo boo boo. Skillity up biddly up 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 up. Zoodle doo 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 boo boo. Save it doodle doo. Zoop zoop boo boo widdy doo. Zoodle up 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 the way. Zoodle doo boo doo boo. Sata doo doo boo doo. Shut well, tisket, a tasket, little yellow basket. I wrote a letter to my mommy, and on that way I dropped it. Yes, on the way I dropped it. A little girl, she picked it up and she put it in her pocket. She was trucking on down the avenue, not a single thing to do. Started poking all around. When she spotted on the ground, she took it. She took my yellow basket, and if that girl don't bring it back, I do believe I'll die. Woo! A tasket, I lost my yellow basket. If that girl don't bring it back, I don't know what I'll do. Oh gee, I wonder where my basket can be.
So do we.
Well, oh gee, I wonder if that girlie I could see.
So do we.
Well, that little bitty basket was a joy of mine. Well, I wish I could find that basket of mine. Well, a tasket. I lost my yellow basket. Well, won't somebody find my basket, make me happy again? Was it green?
No.
Was it black?
No.
Was it striped?
No.
No, it was a little yellow basket. Was it purple?
No.
Was it polka dot?
No.
Was it Christmas colors?
No.
It was little yellow basket. A little yellow basket. Thank you so much. Miss Tammy Hall.
Dr. Kim Nalley and Tammy Hall. Woo!
Did you want me to sit down for the questions or just stand up?
We can just stand.
Oh,
I mean,
that's right. I forgot I don't have a microphone.
I feel transported. Thank you
thank you.
for
Thank you so
transporting
much.
us with your music, and also just feeling a sense of what the Fillmore was like in the 50s and 60s with the music that you just sang. And these were also songs that were on Margaret Wilkerson Sexton's playlist for her book On the Rooftop. But listening to you sing the three that you chose, in particular, can you just tell me, you made me feel how I got over. I really, when I was listening to you sing that, and I wonder what that song means to you, if you could tell us what it means to you.
I believe as a people, and definitely inside of this book, you see what that family had to do to get over. They had to move from the Southeast and escape the KKK to come to the Promised Land, which at the time was the shipyards of California. But I think that all of us as a people have something that's in our way that we're trying to get over.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't feel like we have enough strength. And that song is one of those songs that it gives me strength in any case. And it also gives the characters strength. And it also highlights that gospel is the root of the tree of jazz. You need that gospel. You need that blues to have that jazz. And Margaret understands that in her book.
Yeah, I love hearing you say that because it makes me think about what is it that we think we know about jazz, but that often gets overlooked or doesn't get discussed.
I think that people think that jazz is only Ella Fitzgerald on Verve by Norman Granz, or Sarah Vaughan on Columbia, or Miles Davis kind of blue. And one of the things that I thought was very, very astute was that not only were those tunes mentioned in the book, but the tunes that African Americans listened to. Dakota Staton, Esther Phillips, the blues, Precious Lord. I love the part where she goes, "Precious Lord, take my hand, and, lead me on." And she thought it was sand instead of stand.
Right.
That was very cute. And there's a lot of passion in African American music, and there's this push to. I wrote this paper called "Losing Its Grease," which is taking the African American aesthetics out of jazz. So in order for the music to be considered America's greatest art form, it has to be presented in the most Eurocentric fashion as possible. I have to stand, and I shouldn't move, and I shouldn't wear anything provocative, and I shouldn't clap, and I shouldn't move my hips. And that doesn't make better music. It doesn't make worse music. People that are good musicians will retain these things. Why is blues not America's greatest art form? We have to encompass the entirety of the African American experience and what they listened to culturally in order to understand jazz.
Well, those also so much parallel the themes that we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah.
When we talk about this book, Dr. Nalley, it really was such a pleasure hearing you. Thank you
Thank you so much for having me.
Again, give it up for Dr. Kim Nalley and for Tammy Hall. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mina Kim. I'm the host of a show called Forum here on KQED. And a few words about Margaret Wilkerson Sexton. You probably know her from her previous books, The Revisioners, and also A Kind of Freedom, which was longlisted for the National Book Award. Her newest book, On the Rooftop, which we're going to talk about tonight, is about a mother's intense and incredible love for her daughters, her dreams of stardom for them, and about the complicated relationships she has with her daughters and the three sisters have with each other. And it's all set against the backdrop of 1950s San Francisco, which we got to feel a little bit of the electricity of what that district must have been like in the 50s and 60s when it was the Harlem of the West, and when music just poured from those clubs and music venues. And still, even with everything that it was targeted for demolition, for destruction. And so all of those are the kinds of things that we're going to get into tonight. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Margaret Wilkerson Sexton.
The old babies walk along with rhythm in their thighs, rhythm in their feet, in their lips and in their eyes. Where do eyebrows
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Mina, and thank you so much, Dr. Kim Nalley and Tammy Hall on piano. I am just blown away.
Yeah, I feel so like in a space right now after hearing their performance, and thank you for the beautiful book, which I remember you saying originally was not going to be 1950s San Francisco. Right. It was going to be a more recent event of displacement in Hurricane Katrina.
That's right. My mom actually inspired this book. She's a writer as well, and she comes up with these brilliant ideas. And so in 2007, she called me and she said, I think you should do an adaptation of Fiddler on the Roof. And we used to watch Fiddler on the Roof in my home like every weekend, basically on VHS. And we knew all the lines, we knew the songs and everything like that. And she was like, I think you need to write it from the perspective of a Black woman. The Black woman would have 5 daughters, and they would each, disobey her in some respect with regard to whom they chose to marry. And she was like, the parallel displacement would be Hurricane Katrina. And at the end, the climactic scene would be the mother and her 5 daughters holding up signs on the tops of their own rooftops saying, "Help me." The images we were flooded with during the storm. And I thought it was a brilliant idea. I think it's a brilliant idea. But I had written about Hurricane Katrina in another book, In a Kind of Freedom, my first book. And I just felt like I had moved abroad during Hurricane Katrina, so I wasn't in New Orleans, and my family home was not that affected. So I almost felt like I was mining another demographics tragedy to get work from it, and it just felt wrong to me to focus an entire book on that. And so I started researching, actually the first thing I did was I thought about creating a parallel displacement, like something like post-Civil War. I don't know if I told you that.
You did.
Okay, but
tell them.
Okay. But like this post-Civil War commune that would somehow have been unfiltered by any other race except a Black community that had moved there after slavery, and then it would suddenly be infiltrated at some point in the story, and that would be the parallel displacement. And then I thought, Margaret, you are not an anthropologist or a sociologist. Why are you doing this to yourself? Why don't you just focus on the creative aspect of it? And I started researching actual historical displacement, and I thought surely, there's something that actually did take place to move Black people from their homes. And sure enough, there was. I learned about the Urban Renewal Program. I didn't know anything about it actually before the research. And when I learned that it took place during the 50s and the 60s, I love historical fiction, so it was a nice opportunity to plant myself in that time period. And when I also learned that this community, this Fillmore district in San Francisco, was considered to be the Harlem of the West, and that it was infused with all this jazz music and all this culture that had been brought from the South, I just thought I can do this. I'm from New Orleans, and so many members of that community were from the South, from Louisiana specifically. I thought, I can use the jazz aspect to call up the musical component of Fiddler on the Roof, and I can also still feel like I'm writing in my lane because I'm from New Orleans. Vivian's from Louisiana. She's a transplant. I'm a transplant. It didn't feel like it was beyond my level of authority or authenticity.
There's such emotional richness in this book, but I also feel like when you talk about landing on something that is right, like setting this in 1950s San Francisco, that there is a feeling that you have.
Yeah.
What did it feel like?
That's so true. I have this with all my books whenever I figure out what the setting will be and what the time period will be. It's always through research. It's hard for me to come up with it on my own, which is funny. I used to be a lawyer and I hated research. That's why I left that field, but I've somehow landed here. And whenever I figure it out, it'll take weeks, sometimes. But when I figure it out, I just know, like, oh, this is the story. It's like this very deep sense of conviction. And then the other piece that accompanies that is that when I do projects that don't end up going anywhere, like I actually have this bad habit of every other book that gets published, I write a book that doesn't get published. And so, and I've done that again after On the Rooftop. But I can tell with those books, it's like I know that it's okay to let those books go. But when it's this kind of thing where it's like this deep conviction, like I got the time period, I got the setting, I saw the parallels to Fiddler, there was nothing that was going to make me give this book up. I become obsessed with the book. I start like having these wild predictions about what the book's going to be like, and most of the time they don't actually happen. But but yeah, I get really settled, and I will never leave it alone until it's done. Yeah.
But as settled and as clear as you were that this was the right time, that this was the right setting, what you really wanted to do was go deep into the story of a family.
Yeah.
The relationships of a family. You mentioned Vivian's name. Do you want to just talk a little bit about how she came to you and how sort of the story unfolded from there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I knew that I needed a very strong female character. I think when I first started this, I was in some ways trying to pass commentary on the fact that Tevye was the only voice of that story that we really, heard so poignantly, right? Like we heard from the daughters and Matchmaker, and some other songs, but like it was really Tevye's story, and I wanted to give this woman her story. I wanted Vivian to have that kind of authority in the book and that kind of a presence in the book. I didn't realize until after I wrote the first draft of the book that Vivian is loosely inspired by my mother. And that's probably hard for you to believe, but it's true. My husband had to tell me, like, okay, so you based it on your mom. And I was like, no, I didn't. Of course I didn't do that. But when I read it now, it's the kind of unbridled commitment to a dream. My mother has that. My brother plays tennis, and my mother, you won't believe this either, but when I decided to go to law school, my mother wept. And she said, you're supposed to be a writer, and you're going to regret this. You've always known you wanted to be a writer. Why would you ruin your life like this? That kind of thing.
By being a lawyer?
Right. But it's so, and I didn't see this, but it's so similar to the way Vivian thinks she knows exactly what the girls should do, and it's just so, she almost feels like personally betrayed that they would consider anything that differs from her own dream for them. And so I think unconsciously I knew that woman very well, and so it was really easy to convey her. Now, she's nothing like my mother otherwise, like, the relationship with Preacher and like just every aspect of her. She's nothing like my mother, but that commitment to her children and the fact that I always say this, but she's like a hair away from being unhinged. I think at any time she's about to lose it. And not that that's my mom, but but just that passion with regard to somebody else's dream. Like, I think we can have it with our own, but there are certain people who are just so loyal and fierce about shepherding other people to their destiny, and I don't see that very often. I see that in my mother, and I see that in Vivian. It's like a complete abandonment of self, and I'm just going to pour everything into these girls.
Yeah, and she was trying to shepherd them toward musical stardom.
Right.
Do you want to read from your book?
Oh,
and if you want, do you want
sure.
to set up the passage that you're about to read for us?
Yeah. So early in the story, this doesn't give much away, but early in the story, Vivian does get an offer from a manager, a talent manager, who's willing to take the girls all over the country, and that would be the vessel she's been praying for to get them to reach this level of stardom she's imagined. And she's sitting down with the man. He's made this offer. And surprisingly, she's not just feeling relief. She's not just feeling joy. There are other things coming up for her, too. So I'll read from there. She took another sip and studied the room once more. The alcohol had cleared her, in a sense, and she could see now that even here at Champagne Supper Club, one of the big three in the city, the stage was dusty. The chorus girls' wigs were slanted, their recent baby pooches hanging over their panties. The Johns were losing their patience with the night ladies who took their time. Last week, Vivian had written "Final Act at Champagne" down on a sheet of paper and taped it to the icebox as their next big dream. But now, in the last hour, she had begun to want more for her daughters, a hell of a lot more. And if sending them off was the path there, she would have to let them go. Maybe it was the only opportunity they'd get. She looked up. Yes. What's that? Mr. Franklin asked. Yes, she repeated, feeling like she was coming to. Is that so? She nodded. You got it. It's a deal. She stuck out her hand, and she was glad she had taken the time to polish her nails that evening, cherry red just like her lips, and he squeezed it tight. He was the type of man who seemed to always get his way, but he appeared surprised now, pleased but surprised. You're serious, aren't you? He asked, standing. No doubt the other people in the club thought they were forming more than a business alignment. Standing too, she could feel how much she'd had to drink. She had to hold on to the edge of the table before she joined him in an embrace. When she pulled back, he signaled again to the waitress, this time for a round for everybody in the place. I'm managing her daughters, he yelled out to all of them, and the chorus girls were still shaking their behinds. They'd taken off their gowns, kicked them flat on the front of the stage, and they leaned toward the audience and shimmied their chests, their overflowing coconut bras jiggling. He's managing my daughters, Vivian called out to whoever hadn't heard, and the chorus girls cheered on their way off stage, arm in arm now, snapping their legs up to the ceiling in unison. In the audience, a group formed around Vivian. The news had brought everyone to life. The bored wives, the impatient Johns, the ladies of the night who had shielded themselves all right, shielded themselves 5 drinks deep. By now, these ladies would have celebrated a murder, but luckily it was goodness tonight that called their names. Even the whites stood and clinked their glasses. The band joined on stage and played a tisket, a tasket, and Mr. Franklin took her hand, and they came together and circled while she kicked her legs in short, quick jerks. And then he extended his arm to swing her out and watched her switch her hips on her own, and then he brought her in again only to lift her and spin her on his back while the crowd cheered. A lady usher at the church who cooked for Lena's barbecue restaurant accepted the hand of Deacon Washington, and they came together so tight there was no room for Jesus. But everyone was too mirthful to care, and the likelihood was it wouldn't get carried back to Shiloh the next day. And then a John took a lady of the night, and then a man took his own wife, and then a different man took a different man's wife. And the whites didn't know the moves, but they switched their hips to a distinct pulse of their own, and the chorus girls who had been on stage earlier jumped back on and sang. And then the trumpeter switched the tempo, and they weren't playing anything any of them knew. Now it was the saxophonist meeting eyes with the pianist and the drummer nodding back at the clarinet, and it was Vivian too, and not just her, but all of them, the collective soul of the place. The news Vivian had shared, the John's hopes, the wives' fears, all melding into one frequency. It was driving the sound, which was also in their bones, and without realizing it, they were all kicking their feet out at the same rhythm, snapping their bodies into their partners and back out again onto the floor, swerving and hopping and floating, really. And the joy of having formed something streamed through Vivian, lit her up, made her feel like she was shining. And she had had that feeling before, when she was married, quick and simple as it was. And when she'd borne each of the girls, of course, she had slipped above the ordinary world for a moment. And then the most recent time, she was at Jack's, in the front row, watching her baby sweep a room up into their command, and she'd gone silent for some time, staring, in awe. And here it was again now. She could sell this moment, she knew. People would pay everything for it. She would herself if she could learn to carry it beyond these walls. But for now, it was free, even to the whites who ventured down to the Fillmore for the barbecue and the blues, and who today, for the first time, had lingered. Thank you.
We get a lovely picture of Vivian in that, along with the incredible imagery that your writing creates. But just give us a little bit more of the backstory of the trauma and fears that drive her and her husband for the time that they're married, Ellis, to the Bay Area.
I know. So Vivian is escaping, deep violence and oppression in the Jim Crow South when she arrives in San Francisco, and she's coming to San Francisco for this relative reprieve from racism, and it is a relative reprieve, but she comes, and like many others who came through the Great Migration, she learns when she gets there that there's this line in the book where it's like the whites watch the same minstrel shows. The whites in San Francisco watch the same minstrel shows as the ones in the South, and despite the move across the country, she's still a Black woman at that time, and not only that, she moves there. And she's married when she moves there. And then shortly after, her husband dies and leaves her with these 3 girls. And I think, I always say, I don't think Vivian really cares about the stardom. I don't think she really cares about the songs. I don't think she cares about the limos and the furs that she sometimes will highlight in the book as more of like a superficial dream. I think she moved there with all of this hope, and she doesn't know where to put it when her husband passes, and when she finds that a lot of it was unfounded, and she finds that the only place that she knows to put it is in these girls, and in her dreams for them to have this stardom. But it's not about the stardom. It's just about having something sturdy to hold on to.
And let's talk about the girls.
Okay.
Because it's true. I think one of the things about your book that does go really more deeply than I think you initially intended was into the lives of those 3 girls, of the sisters, the daughters, for Vivian, because Ruth is the oldest, and she is sort of the kind of person you would expect as oldest. She's serious, she's a pleaser. But talk a little bit about Ruth and her aspirations and why they're so deeply held.
Yeah. It's interesting because in the first draft of the book, in the first drafts, there were many. Ruth and Esther and Chloe really didn't get much of a POV. It was just Vivian who had like 90% of the book. And so the girls would come in with these little interludes. It was just like a one-time event, and then they would go, and we wouldn't hear from them directly again. And so when I first wrote the book, I don't think I really knew deeply what her aspirations were and
Ruth's,
why, what Ruth's were, or the other girls either. I knew that they would all disobey the mother, but it was really the mother's story, very similar to Fiddler on the Roof. It had a very similar structure even. And my editor was like, I think you need to give the girls more airtime. I think they need to come in and out. I think we need to see them at least twice. And so once I did that, and they end up coming in 3 times, once I did that, I started to realize why Ruth didn't want to do what her mother wanted her to do. And then there was even more texture to that. Like I realized why she didn't want to do what her mother didn't want to do, or why she didn't want to do what her mother wanted her to do. And then I also realized that she might be wrong. Like she might not even be able to see herself clearly in that way. And I didn't have all of those levels at first because I hadn't spent enough time with her myself. But, she's never had a family, quote unquote. She's always yearned for this traditional family. She lost her father when she was so young, 4. And I think for her, the stardom, the dream of this stardom, that has nothing on the possibility of just having a man to come home to at night who will be there every night when he says he's going to be there, and who'll be a father to her child. I think that's, for her, that's the most she can, it's not even that that's the most she can imagine. I think that's the hole that she has. And I think her primary goal is filling that hole. And I think, you know, we see once that hole is filled, then we see that, okay, you know, maybe there was space for a dream if that gap hadn't been there for her. You know, maybe if that wound weren't there, she could have imagined more for herself.
I love that through the process of writing a character, and I'm sure this happens, it comes alive.
Yeah.
But what I also love is it sounds like the characters were able to surprise you.
Yes.
Even as you wrote them.
Yes. Esther, her relationship with Horace, complete surprise. Complete surprise. Also, I didn't realize until many drafts later, until I spent more time with the girls, I didn't realize that, and I don't think this is giving anything away, but, you know, Ruth is the sister who's amazingly talented. She's like, you know, she's like an old school Beyonce, if you can imagine that. And so if she had wanted it, she would have been able to achieve this dream. Yeah. Esther wants it that badly. She wants it just like her mother wants it, but she's not as good. And I didn't know that. I wasn't able to get as nuanced until I really dove into those characters' worlds. And what ends up happening with Chloe, I never thought that was going to happen. That was like a conversation with my husband at the dinner table.
Really?
Yeah, that happens a lot where he'll just, because I get obsessed with the book, so I'll just literally just be talking about it probably, you know, 5 hours a day. That's the conversation I'm having with anyone who's around. And it happened to be him that night, and I'm grateful for that. And he was like, well, you know, I won't say what it was, but, you know, he was like, yeah, why don't you have that happen? And I was like, of course I should have that happen. I can't believe I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
But I think I have a tendency to make my books' endings a little bit grim. I like to read sad stories. And so I don't know that it would have even occurred to me to do that, to be honest.
Well, and of course, Chloe's the youngest sister. Esther's the middle sister. And, well, one of the things that I loved by you delving into each of them and really giving them a point of view and really focusing on the relationships between them and their mom and between each other, you also realize just how much they not just misunderstand each other, but they misunderstand what, they misunderstand like even the narrative of what they think the other person thinks of them. It's so hard to explain.
I love
But there's
that.
this moment where, like early on, you hear Vivian talking with the talent manager. And she's talking about all three of her daughters. And the way she talks about Esther, even though, as you say, Esther's maybe not that good, like she has to work harder because she doesn't necessarily have the natural talent that Ruth has, the words Vivian uses to describe Esther's impact on an audience is not something that you would ever think that Esther would believe her mother thinks about her.
That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought about that. That's a really good point. I love that too, the misunderstandings and like one of the ones that's funny to me is, so Vivian really believes that the girls all want to be stars. She really believes that, even though we know because we have their POVs that that's not necessarily the case for all of them. I love when she comes home from meeting with the talent manager and she tells the girls the news and nobody's really that excited. And she's like, it's because they can't imagine being away from me. And like it doesn't even occur to her that, so I love, and that's what I love about having those distinct POVs, those multiple POVs, is that you really get a sense for, it mirrors life. Like we don't ever know what anybody's thinking and we think we do.
Yeah.
But so it's a really nice way to convey that in a book because it's just so true. There are so many misunderstandings. We won't even know how many there are, you know.
To really sort of delve into their emotional lives, their views of each other, the way they were interpreting the same event all differently. Was that a stretch for you? Like, did you have to stretch yourself for that, or?
That's a really good question. Not for this book. It was really strange. I will say this about this book. It's extremely unusual, but I knew all of the girls without having to do much work around it. I've done things like, you know, early on as a writer, I've done things like write journal entries from my characters' perspectives. I've like taken personality traits as one of my characters just because I couldn't really grasp the voice. And with this book, for some reason, I had all of their voices. It was just more of like, once I sat down and I just called them up, they came. And so it was like I had inhabited them, I would say. And so I just knew how they thought about certain things. Esther was the hardest, but even Esther, I kind of knew that voice.
That's so interesting that she was the hardest because she's the writer. Right?
I know. I wondered if it was that. I know. And like it was hard for me because she's so hard on the exterior, on the outside, but not. It was hard for me to figure out the ways in which she could be hard with people, but also have her be transparent to the reader and have her be soft sometimes. Like figuring out the various ways in which she presented to the distinct people in her lives, that was tricky because she's so soft with Chloe.
Yes.
But has trouble with friends and others as well. And she can be soft with Horace. But for some reason with this book, it felt like a gift with this book because usually I know most of the characters, but not one. Like with the Revisioners, there was one character that it took me, many, many, many months to figure out. But with this one, they were all pretty clear.
Yeah, and Chloe, she's sort of, it's not hard to be sweet with Chloe because Chloe's the light.
Yeah.
Right? She's the person who's very sweet. She knows how to help meet people in their sadness and bring them some kind of hope. But at the same time, it's a burden, too, to be that person for everybody.
True. That's true.
So you have a sibling?
I have, I didn't grow up with siblings. I always will tell people, I'll be like, oh, my brother said this, and then I'll say, I'm an only child. It's true. Both are true. I asked my mother, I begged my mother for a sibling. For the first 12 years of my life, I literally begged her every day, and she would always say, she was a single mom, and she would always say, oh, in 2 years you'll have one. And I think she was hoping as well. And then by the time I was 13, I just forgot about it. I had my friends and I didn't need it as much. And then when I was 15, my mother took me to dinner and she said, I have something to tell you. And my mother was pregnant with my little brother. But we didn't grow up in the same house. So it's different. He's like a nephew or even like a son, I would say. I almost feel like a first son.
So then the sibling relationship between the three of them that you say just sort of came out of you.
I don't understand that either. I always wanted siblings. And I would I was the person in church, instead of listening to the homily, I would be looking at the families ahead of me in the pews, and I would just be studying them. I was just obsessed with other families. And even like on television, I was always really into the inner workings of families. And I wonder if it's that. And I remember when I went to college, my first year in college, one of my best friend from college had 2 siblings, and I would just talk to her about her siblings. I was just fascinated by siblings.
Wow.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's that. And my mom is one of 7, and my dad is one of 5, so I've seen siblings. I've seen them have arguments, and then 5 minutes later, it's like nothing happened. So I understand that theoretically, but I've never had that experience where you just have an argument and then 5 minutes later, if I have an argument, I assume it's going to be like 6 months later. But it seems like it's 5 minutes with siblings. I don't know.
Well, what's funny is actually my dad was one of 7 and my mom was one of 5.
Really?
But, I should remind the audience that you will also have a chance to ask Margaret questions towards the end of the conversation. So feel free to start thinking about some of the things that you want to bring up. I guess the reason that I'm sort of stunned by hearing, you say there was this like basically a 16-year difference or so between you and your brother is the fact that the relationship of siblings, right, where they can both hold you up, but they can also overshadow you.
Yeah.
You wrote that so incredibly well. Like I could really relate to. I'm actually the second youngest of 5, and so.
Oh wow!
So it was just like reading your book. It really reflected so many parts of that relationship, and from all of their different perspectives. I think the other piece of it is that the piece where as close and as tightly knit as these three are, their ability to be accurate mirrors for each other was not great.
Yeah, you're
They were
right.
super good at it.
right.
And in Chloe's case, it took somebody not from her community, right?
Yeah.
Not someone who had the same experience as her growing up, to reflect something very accurate about who she was.
Right.
And I don't know if there was another model for that you were tapping into, if it wasn't sort of the sibling one.
Yeah,
Or some outsider shows you a truth.
right. Yeah, that was tricky because he's a white outsider, and it felt I had to be really careful about not having him be a savior for her self-esteem and her personality, and
Right.
and all of that. And so it was tricky to strike that balance. I think I wanted to believe that it worked because she already, I felt, was about 80% of the way there. And so he wasn't reinventing anything. Like, everyone else had told her that too. Everyone in the community said that to her, but I don't think she was able to hear it. And her mother didn't believe it. I think that was the major issue, because her mother, I think, as old as we get, I think it's really our mother's beliefs that we're, rooting for all the time. And so, at least for me. And I think because her mother didn't believe it was hard for her to really internalize it. But I do think, Ruth saw it in her. And I remember there's one line in the book where it's like, if Chloe looked a little different, she would be in the front of the stage. So I think there were some people who saw it, and I think like Preacher Thomas saw it, and I think she would have heard it in the church. But yeah, I think because it was her first romance, race aside, I think because it was her first romance, she was willing to believe it when he said it. And it meant so much to her that he saw it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, whether or not there's a personal experience that modeled that for you.
Oh, that,
is there one?
right. That was the question. Oh, again, this is unconscious, but maybe it was my husband. Huh. Yeah. I think, and really the friends I met in college, including I met my husband in college as well, but I think my entire crew that I met in college, they really saw me, and I don't think I had been seen like that in high school. And I didn't reinvent anything. I was the same person. I didn't go to college and change my name and get a nose ring or anything. I was the same person, but I think we were all in a more confident place, and they were able to see me, and specifically my husband, but even my best friends from college, I think we just are that to each other. We're really, we continue to this day. Like, if I get a haircut and I know it's a bad haircut, and it is a bad haircut, whatever, I'm clear on that. If I send the picture to my friends from college, they're going to be like, oh my God, that's the best haircut you've ever had. And I really will. It's not that I believe it, but them saying it enough, I'll start to be able to borrow that, and I'll be able to go out and present it that way. At least I hope. So, so yeah, I think you're right. I hadn't thought about that, but it was, there is a model for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not trying to push. I just was curious.
No, I love that you asked that.
But speaking of models, did I hear right that your mom also manages your brother?
Yes.
Who is a professional tennis player?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so did you borrow from that for the mom?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, some of the lines.
In what ways?
I mean, some of the lines directly, to be honest with you. Like, I think at one point Vivian says, you want to be like Billie Holiday, but you don't want to practice like Billie Holiday, or something like that. That's definitely something my mom has said to my brother.
Yeah.
And, she would replace that with a famous, she might say Serena Williams, or she might say, but yeah, she says that kind of stuff all the time.
Wow, that's kind of amazing that they're able to have a good relationship. She can manage him. Yeah, secret
yes
to that is...
yes, I don't know. Let's put it that way. I don't know the secret, and I don't know if she knows the secret. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. We started the conversation talking about the Fillmore and about it as being this place of a reprieve from racism.
Yeah.
But, you know, the San Franciscans, the white San Franciscans still watch the same minstrel shows and so on. And I was thinking about San Francisco and the Fillmore, and then what happened with urban renewal as a betrayal. I think there's a sense of betrayal.
Yeah.
You have the sense of betrayal that Vivian feels around Ruth not embracing the dream that they all worked so hard for and that she knew her mother had. And I felt like San Francisco was like a parallel betrayal in terms of everything that it presented itself to be and then what it ultimately did. Were you thinking of those things as parallel tracks, or?
Yeah, the disappointment for sure. I love the use of the word betrayal. I don't know if I thought about it that way, but I think it's perfectly apt. And I really like that. I think I was thinking of parallel, you know, disappointment. But yeah, it's you know, it's just it just makes it so cruel to think about. You go to this city and you have, you know, all your dreams are riding on this very, very, you know, immense voyage, especially for that time relatively. It would have been such a significant trip, and everything's riding on it. You get there, and it's not even, you know, I think there's the disappointment of, oh my gosh, I thought this was going to be much different than it is. There's that, but it's also, even with that early disappointment, they built this rich community. Despite that, you know, there was so much endurance and resilience there that they had to tap into just after that early disappointment. And they still built, you know, they built these restaurants and these clubs, and, you know, they basically recreated their own home in a different place. And then to have that taken from them again, you know, after they had already suffered the disappointment of the initial trip, it's just cruel. I just, you know, it's just one of those things that I think when those people were displaced, when the bodies were displaced, I was talking about this with somebody the other day. It's like, what else was moved? You know, like it was such a rich experience for people's souls. When you read about it, you really feel like this visceral, the optimism they had, the hope they had, the tight-knit community they built. It was just it had such a positive impact on their spirits. And so, like, what happens to that, you know?
Yeah. And as deep and as devastating as that betrayal is, somehow you don't have it overpower the book. You don't have it overpower the stories. You don't have it overtake the story. How were you able to keep it at bay, or maybe why?
Thank you. And it was intentional. I definitely, you know, I was writing this during the pandemic, and I felt we all were suffering enough, and I wanted people to be able to to use this book as something to, you know, be soothed by, as a reprieve of its own. And so it was certainly intentional, and thank you for saying that. But I actually didn't know how I had done it. I learned in an interview like a few weeks ago, someone was just like telling me what they thought about what I had done, and I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what it was. And I didn't do, again, it wasn't conscious, but I think it was because the stories are so focused on the family, and you know the family still has the family. So it feels like, as cruel as it is, as much of a betrayal and as much of a disappointment as it all is, you still feel like the richest part of the story is intact.
Yeah.
At the end.
Which it feels like life. I mean, there are so many horrific things that can be surrounding us, or there can be major shifts that are happening that we are going to feel viscerally very, very soon. But we have to be able to control how much we let that in.
That's right.
So that we can live.
Right. That's right.
And we can move on, which also feels very much like a parallel to the book, of the experiences that we have. I think to the extent that you talk about how the one thing that we always know is that change is inevitable.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so how do we, in that process, find a way find a way to live.
That's right. Yeah. And that's Fiddler too. You know, the traditions may not live on, but we have to.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, it is time for audience questions, and I believe there are people with microphones in the audience. If you would like to ask Margaret a question, or if you've read the book and have a comment, please feel free to raise your hand and someone will come to you.
Hi, I really enjoyed this talk tonight, and I thought it was actually one of the best book presentations I've ever been to. But I wanted to ask you, you're sort of showing us in this interview how you are as a writer, how you interpret things, and how you see things after the fact. And I wanted to ask you, if this were to be made into a movie, would you see the movie?
That depends on whether or not I wrote the script. And if I did, I would definitely watch it.
Is there a chance that this could take another medium?
I pray so. I mean, from your mouth to God's ears. Yes, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Mm-hmm.
Another question for Margaret. I see a hand over here.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar, and I haven't read the book, I'm sorry, with the Fillmore in the 50s, but I'm pretty familiar with Richmond and the music scene there. Did your research take you there, and can you compare or contrast what those communities were like, just right across the bay from each other?
No, I didn't even know there was a rich music scene in Richmond. That's outstanding. No, I was pretty focused in the research because, I had to cover, first of all, I have no musical background to speak of. So I actually was learning how to even describe dance moves on stage and how to describe the kinds of lessons Vivian would have been giving her daughters and the ways they would have presented when they were singing, the ways they would have felt about how they were presenting. And then of course it was really focused on the urban renewal program specifically in San Francisco. So no, I didn't broaden it at all. But now that you've said that, I'm very curious.
I think I see some hands in the middle here, and then.
Hi. Sorry, I haven't read the book yet, but
That's
definitely
okay.
plan to after this. So I wanted to ask, maybe this is less about the book than the, but when did you know, first, why did you choose law and, instead of writing? I'm sorry.
No, I love to talk about this.
Yeah. And then, because everyone who went to law school says don't go. So I don't know.
I know.
And then when did you know to put law aside and kind of like choose writing?
Yeah, well, that's such a good question. Thank you. I always wanted to be a writer, like from the age of 8 or something. I wrote this poem that in retrospect is so silly, but my dad, he could see something in it, or maybe he just was a really positive parent, but he was like, this is outstanding. and and I was like, oh, okay. Well, then let me keep doing it. So, and I loved it too. I was an only child, and I was alone a lot. So it was a natural fit for me to do that. And, through high school, my high school really encouraged it. They let me, like my senior year, they let me not take math or science and just write a book. And in college, I majored in creative writing. And it was really like senior year of college where I started to get a little nervous about just like, the stability of it financially. And I had all these people around me who were going to law school or medical school, or like they were consulting. And I just felt like, I didn't have a model for anyone who had done that, who had made a living as a writer. And I felt like, I needed to do something more realistic, quote unquote. So I applied to law school, and actually, I'll say this. First, I went abroad for a year, and while I was there, I had this grant to write a book, and it was a really miserable experience, and I didn't realize that it was because I was abroad and didn't know anybody. I attributed it to the writing itself. I was like, this is too solitary for me. I'm not going to be able to do it. So I applied to law school, and you know, I worked as a lawyer for some years. So in 2011, when I first started at the law firm, we were insanely busy, right? We were working like 20-hour days. And then gradually I started to notice we never had work. And at first we were so excited about that. All the associates were like, oh yes, we get a break. But then it started to dawn on us that it wasn't a good thing, that we didn't have work. And so at the time, these law firms, they didn't want the stigma of laying people off, so they would create these incentive programs. And the idea was they would give you a portion of your salary to just leave for a year. And it's basically severance, but my particular firm called it Dewey Pursuits. And the idea was you pursue your dream for a year, and then you come back. So after some years, I decided to take them up on that, and I left. And my belief was that after a year, I was going to have an agent and an editor. I just was certain of that. And after a year, I didn't have either of those things, but I did have a manuscript. And I thought, you know, and it had been a good year. Like, it had been a really good year. I really enjoyed the writing. I was working the same hours as I was at the law firm, but I was actually like loving it. And I just thought, you know, this is something I can do. And I couldn't give it up. I had gotten too hooked to it, you know. And I ended up I got pregnant with twins shortly after, so it kind of made sense to just, I was basically writing when they were napping. So I kind of used that time to be able to juggle the writing on the side. And my husband was working. I always say that I had the luxury of a person in the house who had a salary. And after about a year and a half, I got an agent. And that agent tried to sell the book I had started in the Dominican Republic when I was abroad, but she couldn't sell it. And I ended up dropping that agent because she couldn't sell the book, and then writing the book that would end up being my first published book. And yeah, it was a long journey. It was like 5 years of working with nothing to show for it, you know, constant rejection and all of that. But I did always know. I used to say, I don't know when I'm going to get published, but I know that I am going to get published. I just can't say when. And yeah, and so I just felt like, you know, and another thing that occurred when I was working on this book was, at first I think I had a chip on my shoulder, and I was trying to like prove to my law school friends that I really had a job and it was a real job. And and then I got to a place, after a lot of internal work, I got to a place where I was like, you know what? I feel really lucky that I get to do this, that I get to have this hobby that I love. And how many people have a hobby that they love this much that they get to do? And if nobody ever reads it, that's fine. I really did get to that place, you know, 80% to that place. I would have my moments, but I was like 80% there. And then things started being a little bit smoother with the publication stuff, actually. It was funny that way.
Well, your mom certainly knew that you were going to be published.
Yeah, that's true. She would, when I would call her, she would remind me.
But wasn't she a lawyer?
My mom, she still is.
She's still a lawyer. Okay.
Yeah.
So she's crying because you choose law.
Yes.
But you still felt like this was the right thing.
I did, because my dad, you know, he loved his job. Like, my dad, before he passed, he had cancer, and he, you know, he was one of those people who worked. Oh, thank you, but no, it's fine. But he was one of those people who worked throughout everything. Like, he would leave chemo and go to work. He loved his job that much. But one day he called and he said, I think I'm going to take some time off from work. And 2 weeks later, he passed. And I knew that was going to happen, because he was the kind of person who would never take some time off from work. And I say all this to say that I had him as well. And I thought, well, he loves it. And we were alike. So I thought, well, maybe I will. But I was wrong, and my mom was right. So, yeah.
I think I saw a couple more hands.
I was going to ask, when you first started writing, did you follow a certain format or outline, and if you still use the same format with each book, and does it get easier?
That's a really good question. I'll answer the last part first. It got so much easier. You know why it got easier? Because in the beginning, I was sitting down, like, and as I would start to write, I would hear these voices, like, you know, it would be my own voices, like I wasn't hearing outside of myself, but it was like, you know, this is never going to go anywhere. Why are you wasting your time? That kind of stuff. And it takes so much energy to battle those voices and still try to be present and creative. I didn't realize how much energy I was wasting on that. And I wasn't, I mean, I don't know that I even had a choice. The voices were there. And then after my first book it wasn't even after the first book got published, it was after I started working with this woman who was helping, like, she was an editor and she was running this year-long narrative program. And the idea was you would send her pages once a month, maybe like 20 pages every month, and she would give you feedback. And I wasn't even published yet. I was just working with her. But just knowing that somebody was going to read it, even if it was just that one person, I was like, okay, it just made everything a little bit calmer. And she was so excited to read the next, every time I would give her 20 pages, she would want the next 20 pages, and she would want the next. And so it felt like, okay, I do have an audience. And even if it's just one, at least I had this audience, and it just helped those voices die down. I have always done an outline. Yeah, and I like outlines. And I don't stay with my outlines necessarily. Reminds me of what you were saying about your script. Like, it's not that I'm going to stay with it necessarily. I'm willing to abandon the outline. But if I start writing without an outline, it gets really crazy. I've seen it happen so many times, and it's like, I'll be working on a book for a year and realize there's no story. Like, seriously, no joke. There's all these themes. They're amazing characters, but there's not really a story there. So if I don't have that outline there, I can run into some serious trouble and waste some time. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I'm just thinking a little bit about, of course, how we started our evening with our lovely jazz scholar and those selections connected to jazz in the Fillmore. And to hear, Margaret, about how you really wanted to create something that was an interpretation of Fiddler on the Roof, and thinking about how the music of Fiddler really does help us understand the story. Can you talk a little bit more about how thinking about jazz and maybe particular songs, particular aspects of that experience of jazz in the 50s and 60s is intended to support the rhythm of the story and to really help to create more of a picture for us, for this family?
I love this question. Wow. Well, there's this one scene, the scene that I just read from. So in the beginning of their conversation, Vivian's talking to the manager who wants to take on the girls. In the beginning of that conversation, Billie Holiday is singing "I Cover the Waterfront" in front of them, like truly like a few feet away. And the lyrics of that song, I think, are just such a perfect parallel to what's happening what's happening at this table in front of them. It's like, well, I cover the waterfront, I'm watching the sea. Will the one I love be coming back to me? And it's like, you can feel all this hope, and you don't quite know if it's going to be concrete. You don't quite know if it's going to come to fruition, but you can feel this hope, and you can feel the sadness in the hope. It's like you almost know from the song that the offer Vivian's getting is not going to play out, because the song is kind of telling you that. Like, we kind of get the impression Billie's, the one she loves, is not coming back to her, and it's like, and I did use that consciously as like a nod to the reader, or a wink to the reader, this is a really lovely scene, but it may not be what you think it is. It may not come to fruition.
Yeah. It's almost like the way jazz makes lovely pain.
I know. It does. And just listening to Dr. Kim Nalley sing before we got on stage, it's like, it really does. Like how I got over listening to her sing that, it's like, she's describing this really horrific time, in these lyrics, and yet there's so much beauty in that resilience. And it's like, and she said it gave her strength, and I feel that, it feels like it's making the tragedy more more doable because there's this beauty that is emitted from having to go through it.
Yeah.
And just also just the chorus of knowing that we all have to get over something. There's something so soothing about that.
Yeah. Mahalia Jackson, I think you said was like the soundtrack.
Yes.
In your mind.
Yes.
As you wrote this.
Absolutely.
Well, Margaret Wilkerson Sexton, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been such a lovely, lovely experience for me, and I hope for the rest of you. And I do want to let people know that your novel is on sale in bookstores, but it's also going to be on sale in the lobby, thanks to Marcus Books from Oakland. And also, so go get your copy. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Litquake. The festival continues with dozens of wonderful events celebrating books and writers and literary treasures throughout this whole month. There's going to be another collaboration with KQED Live featuring host Baruch Porras Hernandez of the Latinx Cabaret Donde Está Mi Gente during the Lit Crawl on October 22nd. So be sure to check out that full lineup at Litquake.org. And if you like tonight's event and want to learn more about what's happening with KQED Live, you can always go to kqed.org/live. Now, I was told before I came out on stage that somebody won something. So the winner of the FlexPass subscription to Berkeley Rep is Terry Baum. Who's Terry Baum? Terry, are you here? Oh, Terry! Yay! So, Terry, Berkeley Rep will reach out to you by email to confirm your pass and let you select your shows to redeem. So, congratulations. All right. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Kim Nalley. Thank you, Tammy Hall. Thank you, Litquake. Thank you, production team here at KQED. And most of all, thank you, Margaret Wilkerson Sexton. Woo!
Thank you.
A tisket, a tasket, I lost my yellow basket. And if that girlie don't return it, don't know what I'll do. Oh dear, I wonder